So many people say things online that I've talked to, and then when I see them in person, I see things online that someone will say. I have a family member who just said something online, and I'm like, I just drove you. And then I see them in person and talk with them, and I go, oh my gosh, I forgot how much I absolutely love her. Wow, we may disagree on things, but that only comes with a human connection, and you just don't get that, online. And we haven't had much of that in the last 12 months.
Hey guys, it's Jeff Burningham. Welcome to season 2 of the Extraordinary Us podcast. We are talking to extraordinary people. I have one sitting across from me. But what I love about these people is I also know them as ordinary. They're ordinary people, just like you and me. No matter our differences, there is always a lot more alike than we share. It's hard to remember that sometimes in the divisive place we live. I also feel like the last year has really exposed that a lot of us are bleeding out emotionally. We're struggling. I hope that this podcast helps you recognize that we're a lot more alike. I hope that it leads to less comparing and more compassion, because that's something we need right now. And I hope it's uplifting and helps us all feel more emotionally whole. And the guy that I'm sitting across from, he needs that emotional wholeness, people. He needs our love. He needs our support.
He's the most ordinary guy you've ever met.
Well, he's the most ordinary guy, maybe, who's done the most extraordinary job. And honestly, Derek, one of the hardest jobs in the state of Utah.
It's been hard
on the planet. Derek Brown's with me, the chair of the Republican Party, father of 4, husband of a great lady, Emily, and he has been the chair. And we want to talk. He announced recently that he's not going to run again. So we're going to cover that today. But first of all, I want to share an experience. You may say you're ordinary, and maybe you are. I remember being at a political event when I was running for governor at your house. So this must have been, 18 months ago or so, something like that. And all of a sudden, Derek gets on the piano. I think it was the State Central Committee that was there. Is this right? Maybe. Which, by the way, for those of you, we have a lot of political people that listen to our podcast. We have a lot of people that are totally non-political, Derek. This isn't a political podcast. These people don't always get along, and they don't always love each other.
No, they don't.
Is that an understatement?
Oh, yeah. Well, I had Boyd Matheson, who made the comment to me on an interview. He said, there's like 4 major political parties in Utah. Yeah. He goes, and I think you're the chair of 3 of them.
That's right, you are. So these people don't always get along. The point is, Derek got on the piano, and you've done this a couple of times, I think, Derek, and it was almost like a spiritual experience, or I don't know how to. All these people came together. Derek's there with his wife, just pounding on the piano. By the way, Derek can play the piano like almost no one I've ever heard. And all of a sudden, there was unity and good feeling in the room. Do you remember this experience?
I do remember, because that may have been one of the first meetings that we had.
I think it was.
And a lot of people were sort of like gritting their teeth and ready for like a battle.
Yeah.
Because the previous couple of years had been just a nonstop, like epic political battle.
Correct.
And yeah, I forgot what, I think we had a sing-along and just kind of hanging out.
We did have a sing-along.
And yeah, it's true. Everyone kind of left with a good feeling. And then that transcended into the next day when we had the big meeting.
Yep.
And it sort of carried over. And
I thought that was super awesome. I just wanted to share that experience as one that wasn't an ordinary experience. Like, that was something I felt like special. We're all political there and there for political reasons, but you brought us together. And that's what we need to do as a country and as a state, for sure. That's not easy, though, is it? Why is it so difficult for us to come together right now? What's up? Give the lay of the landscape.
I think, well, part of it, at least in politics, I mean, I've seen a shift. So in it was 2004, 2005, I was Senator Bennett's general counsel in DC. And comparing where things are in DC now versus then, it's very different. I mean, back then there was this ability for senators on different sides of the aisle to actually get along and at least go out and have dinner and be friends, even if they disagreed. And we just don't see that as much now. And part of me wonders if we're just isolated based on, I think social media has a lot to do with it, because we're able to identify who those people are that we already agree with. We look for that reinforcement, and then we self-group with people that think the way we do, and then there's less tolerance for those who are different. And I think the mark of intelligence is how someone responds and adapts to new information, new people, new ways of thinking. And I mean, truly, I think the smartest people I know are the ones who can look at a situation and go, okay, what am I missing? Where am I wrong?
Yeah, but politicians can't adapt right now. Like, they can't change their opinion on anything. They're crucified, right? Or that's like
Absolutely.
career suicide or whatever you want to say, which is nuts. You should be able to gather information, learn a lot, and then be able to inform your decisions, change your plans, make better decisions based on new information. We don't have that nuance here. I think social media is a big part of it. Like you said, what inspires you about politics? So, by the way, Derek's been the deputy chief of staff for Senator Lee. He's worked with Senator Bennett. He's done a ton of things within politics, not only being the Republican Party chair. You've kind of been around this world for a long time. I remember when I was considering running for governor and we had lunch together in Salt Lake. What inspires you about politics?
Well, I have a love-hate relationship, truly. And I think a lot of people do. I mean, I like the division and the venom, like I hate that part of it. I really do. It just drives me nuts. But there's also this ability to impact people for good. And I mean, like I served for a number of years in the Utah House of Representatives. And I love the fact that I could have people come to me from my district and say, hey, there's this issue that it would just make sense if someone could just have a law that says, XYZ. And I think to myself, actually, that would make a lot of sense. And I talked to someone at the Legislative Council's office and they'd help me draft a bill and then we could we could do it. Now, they can't do that at the federal arena. I mean, that's one of the bummers about the federal is federally things go so slow and it's so polarized. But I think here in Utah, we do a pretty good job of solving problems and because it's closer to people. So I like that about it. But the division and the lack of sort of respect and it's hard.
Let me ask you an
really
honest
hard.
question.
Yeah.
So you've been the Republican Party chair for 2 years, right? What percentage of the time has been dealing with division and venom? Honestly.
70 to 80%.
Okay. So I hope everyone's hearing that. 70 to 80%. That's just too much. Like, that's just too much. How do we overcome that? Give us your best thoughts or feelings. I mean, you spoke about social media, but do you have hope going forward? Like, what is the hope? What is the hope that you hold on to?
I do. One of my favorite speakers and writers, a guy named Arthur Brooks.
Yeah.
And he wrote a book called Love Your Enemies.
Yeah.
And in my very first Central Committee meeting with the 183 members of the Republican State Central Committee, I gave them all a copy of that book.
That's cool.
And I said, look, this is where we need to go.
Yeah.
Like, we are a big tent. There's a lot of us. There are as many, like the spectrum of differences between us in the Republican Party are in some respects as wide as between us and the Democrat Party.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all along the line. So for me, I feel like the most important thing we can do is to look at another human being, look at them as a person and respect them and understand that it's very possible that if you don't agree with something they're saying, maybe you're missing something. Yeah. And I've changed my position on a lot of things. And sometimes it's painful and sometimes it's embarrassing. But I mean, the people I respect the most, in fact, to give you one quick example, there was an individual, I won't say whose name, but most people know who he is. And he's about 15 years older than me. And he took a group of us that were my age to lunch maybe a decade ago.
Yeah.
And there was a particular social issue that we all agreed with and he didn't. And at the end of the conversation about this, he said, you know what, I'm looking at all of you. He goes, I respect all of you and I disagree with all of you. And so I just have to ask, what am I missing? Help me understand, what am I missing? Yeah. And for me, that's been the most important thing. And whenever that comes up, my wife always uses the word curiosity. She's like, the best way to overcome division and the venom is one word, and that's curiosity. If you don't agree with someone, like, get curious. And that's my motto. Get curious.
Get curious. I love that. I love asking questions. That was a big part of my governor run and a big part of this podcast, right? We're learning from people that have had varied experience. Get curious if you don't understand. That's super cool. What went into your decision? I think that people, by the way, Derek is beloved in a very hard job. I think that your approval rating, not that you do this or we poll this, but is really high, generally speaking. And And so I think, and people may have been a little surprised, would you say, that you weren't running again? I think a lot of people wanted you to run again. What went into that decision? Why did you ultimately decide not to run again?
I did have some arm twisting.
Yeah.
And part of it is that it is a full-time, unpaid position.
Yeah.
And I have a company and I have a family. And it's funny, I had someone that said to me, with everything you're doing, what are your hobbies? I said, I don't have hobbies.
Yeah. There's no balance in your life during this season.
No. Yeah. Someone said, so what's your favorite, show to watch on Netflix? I'm like, I don't have one, but but on May the 2nd, I am going to, I need a list because I'm going to start doing that. But it's a combination of that and a combination of just family involvement. I have a little guy who's 9 years old who, when we were in the middle of trying to figure this out.
This is your youngest?
It's my youngest. Yeah. We had a doctor that basically gave us a real stark review of his prognosis on the spectrum. He's on the spectrum.
Okay.
And it was really clear to us that we need to focus on this little guy. And he's coming up to middle school, which if, anyone who has a child who's on the spectrum knows that like you can work through things, but boy, once you get to middle school, it's really hard. That's where the rubber meets the road. And the more we thought about it and the more I thought about like the time I hadn't spent with this guy, little guy, Spencer, like I just kind of went, you know what? I had a member of the state Senate who texted me when I announced, and she said to me, hey, what's your next project? I mean, what? And I said, I just responded. I said, my next project's a 9-year-old whose name is Spencer. Like that's my project. So, I mean, a lot of people wonder, like, what are you going to do in politics now? I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I was in the House. I left to go help Senator Lee out. I left that. I mean, I feel like you serve where you can.
Yeah.
Give it 100%.
Yeah.
And then when it's time to move on and do something else,
I appreciate
that.
Derek, I love that. Your family's always got to come first. And there are seasons and times where we're off balance. When I was running for governor, I didn't have balance. And there are always times to come back to that. My youngest is 10, James, and he was the most vocal. It was funny, the night that we lost out of the governor's race, my 2 oldest, I think, were in shock. We were all, of course, disappointed with our families. Small gathering because of COVID and Senator McKay and his family.
Yeah,
James was like, my 10-year-old was like, yes, Dad's back.
I love it.
So I know Spencer is like, yes, Dad's back. And just so you all know, Derek, we caught up for a couple minutes before we started this, and Derek told me, I hope I won't get emotional about this. And I think that's because of Spencer. I think that's because of you've put your heart into this and done your best, and it's a hard job. Talk to us a little bit about some of the highs and lows. It's been a crazy couple of years. Like what sticks out? When you look back on this time, what will be some of the highs? What will be some of the lows? I'm curious about both.
Oh, I mean, the highs and lows are all wrapped together. I mean, because a lot of it was managing the different, in the party you have like the donors, you have the elected officials, you have the activists. They're 3 different groups and they don't always see eye to eye, and generally they're never on the same page. And so trying to bring them all together has been tricky. I love the fact that there are things that for me, the highs are the fact that we were able to bring the party out of the debt that it had been in. They had a 6-figure debt when I took over. I feel like there is a general feeling of unity in the party. I mean, as much as you can get. I mean, I've talked to a lot of other state party chairs who are in my position, and every party has the same thing. In fact, the head of the Democrat Party here in Utah is actually a good friend of mine. We talk pretty regularly. We disagree on all sorts of stuff, but the dynamics are still the same. But for me, the highs are probably working through some of these difficult problems with COVID, because I'd wake up in the morning and just think, how am I going to solve this? I mean, we were all faced with this unique circumstance that we had never been faced with before. And, here I was looking at the prospect of canceling caucus night for the first time ever.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And I'm sitting.
Now you're going to make me cry.
Oh man.
Because I was running for governor. My gosh.
Oh, it was so hard.
Painful.
I mean, I literally, it was one of these, in fact, I remember distinctly sitting there in a chair in my bedroom at about 10:30 at night. And I had no idea what I was going to do. And I'm sitting here thinking, do I cancel caucus? Do I cancel? What do I do? And I'm literally, and I said this sort of little quick prayer, like, okay, God, if you're there, this impacts a lot of people and I need an answer. And I'm not the kind of person who like gets these amazing answers to prayers. My wife tends to be more sort of in tune with the universe than I am.
Yeah.
But literally, I kind of opened my eyes and just sat there and thought, what am I going to do? And my phone rings. And I look down and it says unknown. And it's like 10:30 at night.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, it's not a telemarketer. So I answer it.
It's God.
Well,
Hello,
not quite.
Derek.
But what it was Congressman Chris Stewart,
Okay.
who had just got out of a classified briefing on COVID with the National Institute of Health, the FDA, and a bunch of other groups.
Yeah.
And he said, Derek, I just got out of this briefing and I just thought I need to call Derek and tell him what information I just learned. And based on that conversation, I was able to sort of plot, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's what it's going to look like, and kind of know where I was going. So it was I had these little touch points throughout the time I was chair where like I felt like things, came together. But man, it's like to get to the point where I felt comfortable, I had to really struggle and, go through the ringer.
Yeah. And isn't that the truth, I think, about all our lives and about our lives in COVID? Whether you were running for governor, running the Republican Party, or running a business, or have a family, or at school, or whatever. Gosh, it's been a time of change. What have you learned during this? I mean, things have changed. It's been a year now, a little over a year. What do you take away?
Okay, well, one of them is something that just crystallized for me this last weekend. I was listening to someone who was speaking, and he said, the quality of your life is directly related to your ability to tolerate uncertainty.
Yeah.
And that just hit me, and I thought, oh my gosh, that is what I've learned this last year. Is I have been craving certainty at every turn, and it hasn't been there.
Yeah.
And I have developed the ability to be more at peace with uncertainty. I'm still not there yet. I mean, I'm still like all of us, we want certainty, we want clarity, but it's like the quality of our life is directly related to our ability to just accept uncertainty.
I love that. And I think it's true. Right. And by the way, I think that for whatever reason, the way that our world is going, the pace of things, technology, I think that is kind of our, if you want to call a new normal, that is the new normal. There's a lot of uncertainty in a lot of what we're doing. So I love that. Did the speaker, or have you had thoughts since then about, so how do we equip ourselves to how do we do that? How do we better do that?
Yeah. One of the things I've been doing, which may sound odd, but there's a lot of people who will resonate with, is I've started meditating.
Yeah.
I wish I were better at this, but getting up and sort of the meditation, the ability to just focus your mind on one thing. And, it's funny because 10, 15 years ago, I would have thought that's this kind of froofy stuff that, and I've started to realize that some of the most influential business and political and just influential leaders in our culture take the time and have learned the art of meditation. And I'm still a baby at that. I'm still learning, but
you're enjoying it.
I am, and there's a lot to learn, but it's just, I keep waiting for the moment where I can be at peace, and I've realized that I have to generate that. Like that's work, and meditating and just being okay with the lack of peace that's for me kind of the biggest takeaway of this year. And I think it is the same thing for all of us, because we keep looking for things to just go back to the way they were so we can feel comfortable and at ease. And it probably never will.
Yeah.
And are we okay with that? We need to learn to be okay with that.
Do you think it's going to go more back to normal than we think, or less?
Oh, I think...
Because obviously some things have changed. We can all acknowledge that. No one knows exactly what it is. But... I think what we're struggling here with now is how normal is this going to go back to? By the way, what do you think? I won't share my thoughts. What do you think?
I don't think we can ever go back fully to the way we were. I think once there's some things about the last year we've experienced that I think have opened our eyes and cut. I mean, the amount of time in my life I have spent commuting.
Yeah.
I have
remote work is here, right? To stay and for good, right? That's a good thing, I think. I'm speaking generally.
Oh, no, I think that's great. And those are the kinds of things that I think we'll see the change with. But I think the other thing I have appreciated is I've really learned to appreciate the quality of my interactions with other people. I mean, the other thing I would say that I've learned is the quality of our life is also directly related to the quality of our relationships.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the problems with the last 12 months is that the relationships that we have with people, I think, have suffered. And it's taught us that, if anything, those relationships matter and human interaction matters. And I love the fact that there's a lot we can accomplish on Zoom.
Yeah.
And there's so much that so much in terms of time and travel that we're now saved from having to expend. But I mean, when it comes right down to it, it's those relationships. And that's what I think, that's what matters. I mean, people on their deathbed don't think about things, they think about people.
Yep. I agree with that. Do you think that that's a close circle of relationships? Here's one of the things that I've learned, because we've spent more time with our families maybe than we have in a long time, right? We've been at our homes, working, doing everything. I have realized, and those are number one and the most important, I've actually realized, though, the value of those kind of secondary touch points. And do you know what I mean? Like social interactions. Like you and I, we haven't maybe seen each other for, several months. I don't see people that I really admire and like you, and touch base with them nearly as much, because there aren't the events that draw us together. There aren't the events that draw us together. What do you think about kind of primary versus secondary relationships when you talk about those relationships? Any thoughts about that?
Well,
because I've thought about it.
It's given me a chance to sort of think about, how deep are my primary relationships?
Yeah.
And but how many? I mean, most of my relationships in life are the secondary ones. I mean, just in the business I have. I mean, the reality
they
is,
are for all of us,
95%
right? You can only
have
a certain amount of really close, intimate relationships.
And I think that's one of the things that we've learned, is to appreciate the primary ones and to not take them for granted.
Yeah.
Although it's hard when you're cooped up, in the middle of
we still love each other?
Pandemic, and
everything's happening.
There's stuff to learn. I think we've learned a lot as a society, but I think we're also going to see a lot of repercussions for the mental health component. I mean, there's going to be long-term side effects of what we've just done this last year. I mean, and it's hard. And I have a son who's a freshman at Brigham Young University in the dorms. And I was in the dorms. I don't know if you had that dorm experience. It was the funnest year of my life. I loved it. I am still friends with a lot of the guys from that year. So my son just had that this last year.
Yeah,
and he'd come home on the weekends, and I'd be like, Zach, what are you doing here? Yeah. It's a Friday night. Go back to the dorms and hang out. And he'd say, Dad, there's nobody there.
Yeah.
They're all either inside their room, kind of quarantined away, or they're gone. I mean, so a totally different experience, and same thing with people who have, he also graduated from high school that same time. And so it's
hard.
It's a different experience.
Hey guys, it's Jeff. Thank you so much for listening to the Extraordinary Us podcast. There's a lot of momentum behind the podcast right now, and we are so excited. I've got a special guest with me for a second here, my wife, Sally.
Hello, good to be here.
Why are you here, Sal?
We're starting a new podcast together, which I am super excited about. It is called Under Our Bed.
And we are literally people under our bed recording
We
right
are
now.
sitting right under our bed.
And if you want to hear more about why we called it Under Our Bed, tune in to our first episode, wherever you get your podcasts, because we're going to explain what it means. We hope to have candid and meaningful conversations together about issues that are relevant to you today.
Absolutely.
Good night, Sal.
Good night.
You think of the disruptions, political disruptions, graduations, weddings, just everything, sporting events, sporting seasons. There's been a lot of pain in the world this year, and politics adds to that pain sometimes.
It does, and it reflects that,
it
or maybe it amplifies that.
I love that. It does reflect that. Like, I think our elected leaders are often a reflection of where we're at, oftentimes, and it does reflect that. There is a lot of pain.
Maybe that we deserve them.
Maybe we do deserve them. We get what we deserve.
Exactly.
So any other really good memories or hard memories or things that you've overcome and are really proud about or whatever? What sticks out in this 2-year term of yours? I know there's a ton. I know it's it never stops. COVID, obviously. Yeah,
COVID, the general election was an exhausting process. I mean, and what we've done now is we've created a system, particularly like here in Utah, we have a vote by mail system. And because of it, I mean, to run for office, it's it takes forever.
Yeah.
I mean, even the election itself, sure, it was the first week in November, but the first ballots were cast, 4 to 5 weeks before that. And then you have the election that ends, and some of the results weren't in for 2 to 3 weeks until after that.
Mm-hmm.
So every time and for me, it was just a learning experience that every time I think, okay, if I can just make it through this particular, then that day would come and I'd be like, oh no, I still have stuff I've got to worry about. I still have problems. I still have issues that I need to, I can't be at peace until, this day. Well, then I'll be at peace about it. And I think I slowly just realized that I'm never, and this is part of politics and this is part of being party chair, is that you never get to a point where you can definitively say, all right, I can now have peace because the problems have ended. Every day there's a new set.
Speaking of that, have you had peace around your decision? So you decide not to run. Does it feel like the right thing?
Yes, absolutely.
What's your hope for the new chair? Not who it is, of course, or whatever, but just like, what advice would you give to the new chair? What's your hope for them? Like, what's the outlook for the next 2-year cycle, in your opinion?
Mm-hmm. Well, my hope is that they will continue some of the things that I've done and help continue to bring people together. But ultimately, I think it's the job of the chair to focus on elections and winning elections. And I think that parties that don't have strong chairs and get sidetracked tend to lose elections. And so, my hope is that whoever is elected will do that, will be able to focus. And, part of leading is that as you're focusing your organization on a goal, and this is the same whether you're in running a political party or a company or a religious organization or whatever, you've got a goal that you're focused on. And there's a lot of people yip-yapping around saying, no, we need to go here, we need to go there. And you just have to say, no.
Laser focus.
Right there. That's where we're going. Yes, but no, that's where we're going. But you know what else is important? Yes, nevertheless, this is where we're going. And so my hope is that it's someone who's a strong leader who can have their eye on the ball and focus and not get distracted.
I think that applies to so many areas of life. It's like keeping the big thing, and staying laser focused on the things that really matter. To that point, the purpose of the chair is to help candidates for that party win. How has winning changed? Meaning how do political candidates win? There are people that are thinking of running for upcoming elections and in the future. That's a hard decision I faced over the last couple of years, was whether to run or not. It's really hard. I don't know. How has winning changed? Meaning, how do you win in politics now? What are the key movers and drivers? What have you focused on as a chair? And where's the ball? Where's the puck going? You know what I mean? Skating towards where the puck's going.
Well, we could have a full conversation just on the value or importance of a political party, because I wonder 10 or 15 years from now if it's going to be as important.
Yeah.
We see a trend away from membership in organizations.
Yeah.
Whether it's a political party, we see that very religious organizations. We're seeing a shift away from that. So that may change, but the actual mechanics of winning they're so different. 15 years ago, when I first sort of got involved in politics, the way you won a local state house race was you put your platform on a piece of paper and you get out and you knock on doors.
Which is
and
when
drop
you
it
first
off.
ran, right? For the state
I ran in 2010.
Okay,
really.
so 11.
And I didn't really know what I was doing. And I sat down with somebody who had just run some campaigns, and they opened up my eyes to technology, to messaging, to marketing, to data analytics. And now it's an entire industry that's based on, as a party, a lot of what we did was training candidates to understand, everything from the ins and outs of fundraising. There's regulatory issues, there's marketing, there's data, and then just parsing your message to certain different individuals based on statistical data that we have. And then the old system had one election day, November 4th or 5th or 6th, right?
Yep.
Now we have the equivalent of election month, because they're voting the entire month.
Yep.
Not to mention if you have a primary, which can be a month or two, or a convention, which can be a month or two. So it is a long, extensive process. And so that's why it's changed so dramatically from, 20 years ago, how it used to be. Now it is run by technology. And a lot of times the person that wins is the one who has mastered the system, the technology, the messaging, the marketing, that sort of thing.
And by the way, I would say, I think that really favors incumbents. A lot of things favor incumbents.
Yeah,
That's not my point. But because it's becoming more specialized, more, I would say, technical, It's good to have a lot of experience doing this, right? Like to having some repetitions, to creating the database, to understanding data, to like one of the hard things for me jumping in kind of fresh and new from being an entrepreneur was just getting the lay of the land, like who's who and what's what. And I had, of course, people in every ear saying, do this, do that. It was hard for me to decipher or determine exactly what was good advice, what might not be good advice. And so I think that's one of the small things that favors an incumbent that's gone through several cycles, has gotten maybe, I would say, more technical or proficient at understanding the nuance of winning elections. Wouldn't you agree?
You had to build the equivalent of a company from scratch.
Yeah.
And you had to start from ground level building, the technical systems, the financial systems, the marketing systems, the personnel, HR, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And if you're an incumbent, you've already got that.
You've got that built in and you know who's who and what's what.
Exactly.
You're exactly right. The hard thing was to know how to put the pieces together to build that. And you're exactly right. The other hard thing about running, that's different about running for public office versus running a business, when you do a startup, no one cares and you're kind of anonymous. When you're running for governor of a state, that anonymity goes away pretty quickly. And we spoke about a reporter that we know well here in the state before we got in here. I was in front of that reporter like day one, and it felt like that person was like trying to take me down immediately.
Yeah, exactly.
And the point is, in a startup, that's not how it is. You toil in anonymity for a long time. You're able to make mistakes, by the way, and then not have really people know or care. When you're a public candidate for a large office, people know pretty quickly, and there are people kind of trying to take you down, so to speak. That's different than in a business.
It is.
Know what I mean?
You know what's funny is I had a conversation with the CEO of one of the largest companies here in Utah, a very well-known CEO, probably 2 weeks ago, and I made the comment that I said, what, you obviously have far more employees, so what I'm dealing with is not as difficult as what you're dealing with. He goes, no, Derek, you don't understand. He goes, as the party chair, he goes, if I make a decision that causes my business problems, it's not the front page news story.
Yeah.
He's like, one misplaced word by you in an interview, and it could be the front page news. So you've always got to be on your guard.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's hard. It's hard to always be on.
It is. And you also, as the party chair, one of the other things that's been hardest for me is that I have very strong opinions about policy related issues. But as the chair of the party, I also recognize that I have people in the party who disagree on those very issues. And my job isn't to use the bully pulpit of my position to settle the dispute once and for all. My job is to recognize that we may have differing viewpoints among our elected officials. And those elected officials were all elected by the members of my political party. Yeah. My job is to exercise discipline and restraint and support them all rather than
express your opinion or push your agenda. Has that been hard?
Oh yeah, to pick winners and losers, because some of the biggest issues we've had, frankly, like the impeachment vote, frankly, I have a certain group of people in the party who think that it's my job to stand up and punish, one of the elected officials. But there are hundreds of thousands of people who agree with that particular person that they want to punish, who are also members of the same party. I'm the chair of all of them, not just one part of them. And that's hard, because when I make that decision, then they naturally assume it's because I personally must feel one way or the other. Yeah. And certainly I have my opinion, but it's what I'm doing is exercising restraint and, acting within the role of what the chair ought to do. And it's hard sometimes.
It is. And we got to talk about that a little bit, because for those of you who don't know, who don't live in Utah or don't drive up I-15, there have been billboards both censoring or like criticizing some of our political officials, and those same political officials being like thanked and thank you so much, right? So you have the same group, the same Republicans, the same party, people loving a certain senator or not, and or hating almost a certain senator or not.
And they're all within the same party.
The same party. And you represent that party. And one of the highlights for me, and by the way, since losing out of the governor's race, I tried to detox a little bit from politics. But one of the things that happened, the impeachment vote that I know after, you had maybe senators in the same state with different opinions. You guys released a very poignant statement, correct? This to me will be one of the highlights, and I think something that would stick out to you. What did you think of that? You kind of basically said, look, The party, this is what I took from it. The party is wide enough to have different opinions. And that's got to be the case, people. We all are different people. Like, we're going to have different opinions. What there is not room for is like saying, just because I disagree with Derek on this one issue, Derek's a bad person, or somehow Derek's evil, or that's just not the case. We know all these elected officials. We know they're great in some ways. They have strengths and weaknesses just like all of us. But how was that process? Because I'm sure you had pressure on both sides, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And for me, again, it was the issue of just exercising restraint. I mean, some people view the division and the difference of opinion as a weakness. Like, we all need to think exactly the same. And my take on it was, no. First of all, that's just inherent within a political party. I mean, like, this is not a Utah specific thing. This is California has the same thing. Oregon, I mean, New York, they all have it. But my approach was to say, look, the fact that we have this divergence of opinions is a sign of strength. And, my job is not to pick and choose who I like the most. My job is to recognize there's going to be a difference of opinion. And in doing that, with maybe only one or two exceptions, I had almost every elected official in the state of Utah at one time or another reached out to me and said, hey, you know what? Thank you. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Even though I may have disagreed with the impeachment vote, or I may have disagreed, they're like, you know what? It makes sense. Because what it also did is it sent a message to elected officials in my party that they can listen to their conscience.
Yeah, they can be free to actually do what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, because
give their best efforts right towards what they really believe.
Exactly. And there is this mentality that you have to think a certain way, and then that is what a real Republican is. Well, no, it's not.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's going to be different we have Republicans all over the state of Utah in the House and Senate who have differing opinions on all sorts of issues. And the job of the party is not to pick and choose who we like the best. Now, that being said, also you have elections.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's why I've always felt like, our job is not to shame particular elected officials for votes. Our job is to support them. But there's also a reason that when it comes to primaries and those elections, the party is neutral.
Yeah.
So, we're going to support you as an elected official, but when it comes time to get reelected, and if somebody challenges you within the party, you're on your own. Yeah. Like, you got to make the case. And if you make it and you get elected again, we support you.
Yeah.
So that's the way I've approached it. And it has been... It's a bit of a challenge.
It is interesting. So I got to ask one last political question, then we're going to move on to a couple personal things and wrap up. But so you brought it up, and I think it was bold and brave, but you're right to bring it up. The future of the Republican Party, or I'm just saying political parties in general. Give us your thought. Because it is crazy. You're right. What are your thoughts?
I've struggled with this because there are a lot of sort of hallmarks that I'm seeing out there on the horizon that make me think that political parties, with the advent of technology and interconnectedness, may be less and less relevant moving into the future.
Yeah.
And I don't know, because right now they're still very important in that people affiliate, but I think that we're going to see some changes on the horizon. And so that's been one of the concerns that I have. And then obviously as the head of a political party, my job is to look at the long-term trends.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is, if you're in our state and you're looking long term and sort of reading the tea leaves and you're a Democrat, you're pretty happy.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the trends dealing with kind of where millennials are going, where suburban women are going, with a lot of the demographic and geographic trends, like, they are going very clearly in favor of a 10 years from now, my political party will not be the dominant political party in Utah if things continue as they are. And what's interesting is I look at that because if you looked at a map of the 2004 presidential election, the entire Western U.S., with the exception of, the West Coast, California, Oregon, or Washington, it was a sea of red. Every state is red.
Yeah.
And with each passing presidential election, Utah is surrounded by one more blue state.
Yeah.
And so they're fascinating trends. And part of that is also the influx of new people.
Yep.
And right now, if you're in a state like Utah, there's a massive influx of people from other states. And so I just think, again, we have to there's a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah.
And we need to learn to be comfortable with that. Otherwise, we will struggle.
One other hard question I lied. Do you think that is good, by the way? Meaning, do you think parties maybe not being as powerful is good or bad for the system?
Well, the problem is, I think that parties have created a level of polarization because,
Yeah.
as we talked about earlier,
Because it's about winning and losing, right?
Well,
Like,
yeah, and the same way that we like sort of balkanize ourselves on social media because
Yeah.
we're with a smaller group of people
Yeah.
that think exactly the same way we do. That's my concern with parties,
Yeah.
is that, and that's why a party has to be strong. Is if a party is strong, it means there's room for a lot of people in the party. If a party is weak and fractured, it means a very small, narrow group of people controls it. And then invariably they lose elections. And so I think political parties have to be strong. And if they're strong, then they'll be welcoming of a diversity of opinions. And I think that's a good thing. Once you get very narrow and you have a small group of people who aren't very good at anything other than sort of classic black and white thinking, then I think you see what's happening in DC, which is, I when I worked in DC, I remember we used to make fun of it at the time, but it's kind of quaint that like Senator Hatch and Senator Kennedy, they would fight like cats and dogs in the Judiciary Committee hearing, and then they go out to dinner.
Yeah.
And they really were they were good friends.
Yeah.
You just don't see that anymore.
Yeah,
And
that's
I think that is a symptom of the very issue you're identifying.
I agree. So what's next? What are you thinking about? What's on the horizon for Derek Brown besides Spencer? Focus on Spencer.
Well, I'll still be involved in the party.
Yep.
One of the things I'm one of the board members of a new PAC that is being established by a number of our female legislators, and it's specifically with the intent of financing, promoting, training, and assisting women running for office.
Yep.
This is being led by, kind of the spearhead is Representative Candace Perucci,
Yep.
who is just I think she's the youngest member of the House, and she's a powerhouse.
Yeah, I like
she
her.
is phenomenal. But I talked to her a while ago, and I said, look, I want to do more than just pay lip service to this issue. Like, what can I do? And so we're going to actively help, because a lot of women will run for office, but if you're running against an incumbent, like you found out, who already has this established machine in place, whether you're a man or a woman, you're going to struggle.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things we can do is actively recruit and help our female candidates and do more than just pay lip service, but actually provide resources. So I'm going to spend some time on that issue as well.
Yeah. Candace has reached out to me several times. I'm excited about that initiative. It sounds great.
Yeah.
Is there a mountain bike in your near future?
There just might be. So this is as soon as
Because you've had no hobbies for a couple of years now, at least.
I had a road bike, which I don't think I used at all last year because I was, just doing.
That's one of the hard things, by the
this-
way, people who haven't been involved, let me just say, a lot of political events are at nights and on weekends. So running
That's
a party,
exactly right.
running for governor, whatever, it's kind of at least 6 days a week to 7 days a week full-time thing, because you have things almost every night, at least pre-COVID, and then it's a lot of Saturdays, right?
It is the equivalent of a full-time job. I mean, the reality is. And so, but the thing that I've discovered that I love is that, I've loved getting to know people all over the state. And you probably had the same experience
Yeah.
running for governor, is that
It's
even
inspiring,
people
yeah.
that I didn't think that I would like per se, like once I got to know them, all of a sudden, like you see them for who they are. And even the people who politically disagree with you, I realized that people who kind of drove me crazy at first, like once I looked into their soul and got to know them, I realized this is how they are making a difference. This is what they have identified as the way that they can contribute to the world that they live in. And once I look at them through that lens, there's a level of love and respect that you have. And even though you may differ on all sorts of things, I mean, ultimately, I think that's the connection that you need. That's what life is about, is that connection.
I totally agree. That's what's inspired a lot about this podcast, right? I just wanted to share some of these exciting stories and good stories of people who are different than us, but that are really good. And my bias is that 99.3 or 0.7, a vast majority of people are really good. They're trying their best to do what's right. And by the way, this is Republicans and Democrats.
Absolutely.
They're bringing their worldview, their experience to their past experience to their life. They're doing their best, and they deserve our respect as a fellow human being on this earth, no matter if they disagree with us.
Yeah, and I see a lot of the thing that I hope we can get through is ascribing motivations to people. I mean, you don't know their motives. Just assume that it's good. And I have a sister-in-law who's a therapist, and I was talking with her about someone in the family, and I said, regarding what this decision this particular person made, I said, it makes no sense at all. And she said, Derek, it makes perfect sense. I said, no, it makes no sense. She goes, Derek, if you get into his brain and who he is and the way he looks at the world, she goes, it makes perfect sense. Yeah. And you can appreciate why he decided what he did and how you can love him. And that conversation opened my brain. I just thought, you know what? If there's ever someone that I don't appreciate or feel warmly towards, it's my job to look in their eyes and go, okay, clearly I'm not actually seeing the world through through the lens that they're wearing. And if I can do that, then they come alive, and we can be much more sort of vulnerable and open and understanding. And the problem is online, you can't do it.
There's not nuance.
And I think that may be the issue.
That is a big part.
So many people say things online that I've talked to, and then when I see them in person, I see things online that someone will say. I have a family member who just said something online, and I'm like, it just drove me. And then I see them in person and talk with them, and I go, oh my gosh, I forgot how much I absolutely love her. Wow. Yeah. We may disagree on things, but that only comes with a human connection, and you just don't get that, online. And we haven't had much of that in the last 12 months.
Well, Derek, again, kudos to doing a fantastic job in a very hard situation and one of the hardest jobs in the state. Before we wrap up, are there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners? How could we help you? Life lessons or thoughts things that have been weighing on your heart or mind that you might want to share?
Well, to the extent that, I would say get involved in the political arena. I mean, there are so many avenues of involvement. And this is probably the question I get most often is, how can I get involved? What can I do? And it's not just, a political party, but also whether it's running for office or helping those that are running for office. I had, when I was in the House of Representatives, maybe 20 people that were from different areas and different economic backgrounds and different lines of work who I would go to and ask for advice. And most of them were people who just reached out to me and said, hey, what can I do to help? You're our representative, thanks for serving. What can I do to help? So that's what I would suggest is just, whoever your state house or state Senate member is, or whatever it is, you're in California, your assembly member, whatever you call them, reach out and offer to help, because that's how we make a difference, is getting involved. And the one thing I've learned is the more people that get involved, the better the output every time.
Yeah, lean in. I'm sure a lot of running to be the party chair was similar to me. Am I going to just talk about it, or am I going to be about it? Am I going to do something about it?
And for me, that's why I ran.
Yeah, and that's why I ran too.
It was me complaining to my wife about the person who was running as the only person running, and someone really needs to step up. Yeah. Someone needs to do this. And she's like, why isn't that someone you? And finally, one night about midnight, I'm like, all right. I'll do it. I will do it. I'll do it. And so, we need people that will step up like that.
Well, that someone has been you the last couple of years, and you've done great, Derek.
Well, thank you.
I appreciate your friendship. Thanks for spending some time today.
All right. Thank you. It's been fun.
Derek. I wish you could have been in the podcast studio with me and with Derek Brown. He has had such an extraordinarily tough job. Having jumped into the public square myself for a moment or a couple of years, however hard you think it is, it's harder, a lot harder than no matter how hard you think it is. Derek's done a great job with COVID and under so much political pressure. I really admire him. I love how he spoke about the last year being about how we deal with uncertainty. I think the world is becoming less and less certain, and a lot of our mental health and mental energy is about trying to put certainty around things. That resonated with me. He also spoke about relationships, and we know that this podcast is about the power of relationships and how we are so much better together than we are apart. I love that he had the courage, and I totally agree with him. What are the future of political parties? I don't know if political parties are serving us in the very best way. What does the future look like for the Democratic and Republican parties, et cetera? That will be really interesting to see what unfolds. And most importantly, the thing that I love most that he said was when he spoke about curiosity. Whenever, the answer to perplexing questions is curiosity. The answer to understanding others that we don't and diversity is curiosity. Be curious. Ask good questions. That was great advice from Derek Brown. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Again, this is Jeff Burningham signing off with the Extraordinary Us podcast. Talk to you next week.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Extraordinary Us podcast with Jeff Burningham. Please help us grow by leaving a rating and review and subscribing on your favorite podcast platform. Also, tell your friends and share on social media. See you again next week.
Hey guys, what's up? It's Jeff.
And Sal.
I'm here with my wife. Why? Because we're starting a podcast together.
Yes, we are.
And it's called
Under Our Bed.
Why is it called that, Sally?
Because we are sitting under our bed right now.
We are.
In this podcast
Yes.
studio.
And we're going to be talking about things that are interesting, vulnerable, relevant.
Funny.
So check it out. Funny if you're on. So check it out wherever you get your podcast, wherever you listen to The Extraordinary Us. Look for Under Our Bed with Jeff and Sal.
Check it out.
Good night.
Good night.